Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're traveling back to the Middle Ages. We're going to challenge some assumptions you might have about this period, the so-called Dark Ages.
What's your ages?
But I might surprise you to learn that there was actually a pretty amazing story unfolding. It's the rediscovery of Aristotle.
Yeah, by Christians
Muslims.
and Jews.
And for this journey, our guide is the book Aristotle's Children by Richard E. Rubenstein.
It's a fascinating exploration of how this rediscovery actually ignited an intellectual revolution. It was a clash between faith and reason.
Which is something we still feel today.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so set the scene for us. We're in Europe, early Middle Ages.
Right.
It's a world steeped in religion. But you also said intellectually stagnant. What did that look like?
Well, imagine if you can.
Okay.
A world where knowledge was confined to monasteries. The study of ancient Greek philosophy, especially someone like Aristotle, was considered dangerous.
Dangerous.
It's almost heretical. His works were thought to be lost to the West. Their wisdom vanished.
But those works, they weren't truly lost, were they?
No, not at all. While Europe was in this intellectual slumber, Arab scholars in the East had been busy.
Keeping the flame alive.
Exactly. They preserved, studied, and even expanded upon Aristotle's writings.
Wow.
They translated his works, added their own commentaries, and kept the philosophical flame burning bright.
So how did this lost and found wisdom make its way back to Europe?
It was a slow but steady exchange through trade routes, diplomatic missions, even the Crusades,
Right.
These Arabic translations of Aristotle started trickling back into Europe.
And through particular places?
Especially places like Spain and Sicily. Yeah.
So we have these pagan philosophical ideas suddenly back in a deeply Christian world. What happened? What was the impact?
It was like a shock to the system, a rediscovery of a whole body of knowledge. I mean, covering everything.
Really?
Logic, ethics, physics, biology. This rediscovery of Aristotle just fueled an incredible period of intellectual fervor.
But I imagine it wasn't just about absorbing Aristotle's ideas wholesale, was it? I mean, there had to be some friction.
Of course. There was a struggle to reconcile these new ideas with existing Christian doctrine. I mean, these were radical concepts for the time. And this is where we see the emergence of a new field of study.
And what was that?
Theology.
Okay.
Thinkers like Anselm of Canterbury and Peter Abelard emerged, trying to find ways to harmonize faith and reason.
So can we use logic and philosophy to deepen our understanding of God? Can reason illuminate the mysteries of faith?
Exactly. These were profound questions they were grappling with.
You mentioned Peter Abelard. Now, he was a bit of a rock star, wasn't he?
Well, he was.
A tragic love affair, a controversial career. Tell me more about this guy.
He was definitely groundbreaking. I mean, he pushed the boundaries of philosophical inquiry, applying logic to matters of faith in ways that really challenged the church.
It sounds a little dangerous, even.
It was. His story, including that forbidden romance with Heloise, really speaks to the intellectual ferment of the time and, well, the risks.
The risks of challenging traditional thinking.
Exactly.
So we've got Aristotle's ideas sparking new theological inquiries, but it wasn't just the church that was interested.
Right.
There were groups deemed heretical by the church who also found inspiration in his works.
That's right. We're talking about the Cathars. They thrived in southern France. They were particularly drawn to Aristotle's concept of a dualistic universe.
Now, for our listeners who may not be familiar with that term, break that down for us a bit. What does dualistic universe mean?
It's the idea that reality is divided into two fundamental principles, good and evil, spirit and matter.
Okay.
And the Cathars use this concept from Aristotle to support their own beliefs that, well, challenge the church's authority and its view of the world.
So you've got the church trying to integrate Aristotle into its theology, and then you have these heretics using him to challenge the very foundations of the church. This is a recipe for conflict, isn't it?
It definitely created tension.
Yeah.
And this tension actually forced Catholic scholars to engage with Aristotle even more deeply. They had to figure out, can we reconcile his ideas with Christian doctrine, or does he pose a threat to the faith?
It's a battle for the soul of Western thought. And I'm guessing this battle gets even more intense as we move into the 13th century.
It certainly does. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll meet two giants of medieval thought, Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus. They offer radically different answers to that very question.
This is fascinating. I can't wait to see where this intellectual journey takes us next.
Yeah.
But before we go, a quick reminder to our listeners. If you want to delve deeper into this topic, you can find additional resources, including links to Richard E. Rubenstein's book, Aristotle's Children, on our website. We'll be back soon with Part 2, where we explore the clashing interpretations of Aristotle and the continuing struggle to reconcile faith and reason. See you there.
Welcome back to Aristotle's Children. As we dig deeper here, we find ourselves in the 13th century, a period where this intellectual clash, this
is where it gets good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This clash, sparked by Aristotle's rediscovery, really reaches its peak.
Okay, last time we left off with the church trying to figure out how to reconcile Aristotle's ideas with Christian doctrine. So are we about to meet these two guys?
Yes. Two towering figures.
Yeah.
Thomas Aquinas.
Okay.
And Duns Scotus. And they both engage with Aristotle, but their interpretations are. And the paths they carve out for Western thought are dramatically different.
Okay, lay it out for us. What are the differences here?
Well, their approaches couldn't be more different.
Okay.
Aquinas, a Dominican scholar.
Okay.
He is often hailed as the figure who successfully integrated Aristotle into Christian theology. He saw in Aristotle a powerful ally, a source of reason and observation that could actually enhance understanding of God and the universe.
So instead of rejecting Aristotle as a pagan philosopher, Aquinas embraces him. He finds ways to make his ideas work within a framework of faith.
Precisely. Aquinas argued that faith and reason were not at odds. They were complementary paths to truth. He believed that reason, guided by faith, could lead to a deeper appreciation of God's creation, this divine order woven into the fabric of the world.
It's like he's building a bridge between the earthly realm, that world of senses and logic that Aristotle explored, and the divine realm, the realm of faith and revelation.
That's a great way to put it. But as you might imagine, this harmonious vision, this vision of faith and reason, wasn't universally accepted. And this is where Duns Scotus comes in, a Franciscan scholar, who, while deeply influenced by Aristotle, offers a very different perspective.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there were some theological tensions between the Dominicans, like Aquinas, and the Franciscans. What were some of those key differences?
Well, one of the biggest was their understanding of God's freedom. Aquinas, with his emphasis on reason and order, saw God's actions as somewhat predictable, bound by logic, the laws of nature. But Scotus championed this idea of God's absolute freedom.
Meaning?
God wasn't limited by anything.
Whoa.
Not even logic.
So while Aquinas sees God working through a system, a rational order, Scotus is saying, no, God is outside of that, capable of anything.
Exactly. For Scotus, God's freedom was paramount. He believed that God's actions transcended human understanding. God wasn't confined to these neat categories of Aristotelian logic.
Okay, so this is a radical departure from Aquinas' more systematic approach.
Right.
We seem to be shifting from a vision of faith and reason working together to a vision where they might actually occupy separate spheres.
That's a crucial point. These contrasting interpretations of Aristotle championed by Aquinas and Scotus would have profound and lasting implications for Western thought. But it's important to remember that this philosophical debate wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Right. I mean, it was unfolding against a backdrop of some pretty significant social and political change. We talked about the rise of universities.
Right.
Conflicts between the church and secular rulers. And you said a growing emphasis on experience and observation and learning. Tell me more about how these changes influence the intellectual landscape.
Yeah. Imagine a world in transition.
Okay.
Universities are emerging as centers of learning. They're challenging the traditional monopoly of monasteries on knowledge.
Okay.
The church, once this unchallenged authority, is facing pushback from powerful kings and emperors. And within these universities, there's a new spirit of inquiry taking root.
Oh, interesting.
A spirit that values observation and experimentation alongside these traditional texts and doctrines.
So the world itself is in flux, and these intellectual debates about faith, reason, and the nature of knowledge, they're reflecting that dynamism.
Precisely. And within this dynamic environment,
Yeah.
there were scholars who dared to push the boundaries even further.
Oh, like these guys. Tell me more about them.
Using Aristotle's ideas in ways that would foreshadow scientific revolution to come.
Okay, who are we talking about?
One striking example.
Okay.
Nicole Oresme, a 14th century thinker, who, drawing upon Aristotelian principles of logic and observation, dared to challenge
Challenge what?
that long-held belief a stationary Earth.
He's proposing a moving Earth,
Yeah.
centuries before Copernicus.
Yes. Oresme, by carefully considering astronomical observations and applying logical reasoning, suggested that the Earth might actually rotate on its axis. It was a radical concept that went against the prevailing worldview. It hinted at these seismic shifts in scientific thinking that lay ahead.
So Aristotle's ideas,
Yeah.
rediscovered and reinterpreted, planted the seeds for such revolutionary changes in how we understand our place in the universe.
They did. And as we move into the early modern period,
Okay.
we'll witness how these seeds grow into even more radical challenges to traditional authority
Right.
and the emergence of this new scientific worldview.
This journey through the Middle Ages is so illuminating. I'm ready to see where this intellectual revolution leads us. We'll continue our exploration in part 3,
Yes.
delving into the so-called divorce of faith and reason. And we'll examine the lasting impact of Aristotle's rediscovery on Western thought. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're looking into the legacy of Aristotle. We've seen how his rediscovery shook things up back in the Middle Ages.
Right. Sparked those debates about faith,
And reason.
which are still going on today.
Still relevant.
Yeah.
We've gone from that initial shock of encountering these lost works to those attempts to reconcile them by figures like Aquinas to make it work with Christian theology.
And then, of course, contrasting views of thinkers like Duns Scotus.
Yeah. Who emphasize God's absolute freedom and the limits of human reason.
Right.
And last time, you hinted at this growing tension, a separation between faith and reason that started emerging in the early modern period. So what were the driving forces behind this shift?
Well, think about the context. It's a period of intense change, upheaval. You have the Renaissance, the rise of humanism,
Okay.
voyages of discovery,
Right.
the invention of the printing press.
Big changes.
All of these factors lead to questioning
Questioning of.
traditional authority,
Including?
including the church. Ancient philosophers like Aristotle.
So it's not just a rejection of faith,
Right.
but a broader shift.
A more critical, questioning approach to knowledge in general.
Interesting. So tell me about these thinkers.
Like Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes.
Okay.
They reacted against the scholasticism of the Middle Ages. They helped lay the foundation for a new scientific worldview.
Yeah.
Emphasis on observation, experimentation,
Okay.
a more empirical approach.
To understanding the world.
Exactly.
I would imagine this new way of thinking was further bolstered by.
Scientific discoveries.
Right.
Absolutely. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler
Yeah.
challenged these long-held assumptions about the cosmos,
So these advancements
often made in the face of opposition.
from
Religious authorities furthered that divide
between.
between faith and reason.
So instead of seeing these two things
Faith and reason.
working together, as Aquinas argued, there's a growing sense that they're actually in separate spheres, maybe even conflicting ones.
Yeah. And this separation was, well, intensified by the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's emphasis on individual interpretation of Scripture,
Okay.
rejecting the Church's absolute authority. All that led to a more personal and subjective understanding of faith.
So where does that leave us? What can we say about Aristotle's enduring legacy?
It's complex, multifaceted. I mean, many of his scientific theories
Outdated.
have been superseded, but that emphasis on logic, observation,
Yeah.
pursuit of knowledge,
That's all still important.
it continues to resonate.
And more importantly, perhaps this whole debate
Mm,
that he sparked
mm.
about the relationship between faith and reason, that's still very much alive today.
Absolutely. I mean, from bioethics to social issues.
Yeah.
That tension between these two fundamental ways of understanding the world, it persists. Aristotle's journey reminds us that search for truth and meaning, it's ongoing, and it often involves navigating that complex interplay between faith and reason.
Well, this has been a fascinating exploration. A huge thank you to Aristotle's Children by Richard E. Rubenstein for guiding us through this. And to our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. How do you see the legacy of Aristotle playing out today? What are some contemporary examples of this tension between faith and reason? Head over to our website, share your insights, and explore some more resources. Until next time, keep those minds curious.